Hi everyone, I'm Angela and welcome to Crafting with Angela. Today we are going to be making a galaxy birthday card. So we are going to need, I have a blending mat here. I have an A4 sheet of white cardstock that I'm going to create all of it into a galaxy background. I'll then cut it down so it fits onto my card base. But I like to create when I'm creating galaxies. I think it's a lot of work to go to just make one. So I always make an A4 page and then I have extra if I need it. I have various inks that I'm going to use today. So I have Distress ink in black soot. And then the rest of these are all Distress oxides. I have pickled raspberry, salty ocean, seedless preserve, peacock feathers and squeezed lemonade. I'm just going to use them in various bits and pieces across the board. I also have some blending brushes, and the way I do my blending brushes is I have one for each colour family, and then I just use it regardless of what the ink is, whether it's Distress or Memento or any of the mini ink cubes that I have. I just use the one brush per colour family. So I'm going to start with that. As well as that, I have, for later on, I have Versamark embossing ink. I have two different embossing powders. The first is just a detailed silver. Got this from Lovecrafts. And then I also have a Wow glow in the dark embossing powder. I'm going to do that to put some stamps on at the end. Put some stars on at the end. I have my homemade embossing buddy. I have a couple of stamp sets. So I have this large happy birthday stamp set from Woodware. I'm probably going to use this one down at the bottom, but I'm going to use one of these for the front. And then for the inside of the card, I have this Dovecraft stamp that says friends are like stars. You can't always see them, but they are always there. And that's going to go on the inside of the card. I am then going to need just my normal tools, a bone folder, a pair of scissors, or you can use a ruler and a craft knife, or I might bring my caterpillar out instead. It just depends on what I'm in the mood to actually work with when I get to that stage. And some glue or tape runner. So I have, this is just a squeezy bottle full of standard PVA glue, and I will find my ATG and use that as tape runner as well. Because I'm using the embossing powder, I will also need a heat gun. I'm leaving that over at the side until we need it. And then I'm going to put a layer of silver mirror card underneath the front, and I'm going to make a card base out of this piece of navy blue. It's like almost leather effect card on one side, and that's going to be my card base. So with that in mind, let's get started with the card. So we're going to start by creating the galaxy background. So what we do is we're going to leave the black suit to one side because that's the last step, and we're going to focus on these 5 colours that we have at the minute. So if I'm going to start with the seedless preserves, the purple colour. Get my brush before it falls off the table. And what I want to do is just come in, make sure the brush is well loaded with ink, and we're just putting circles of circles of colour in spots. And what I do to start with is I just do a circle and bring it out, getting a bit lighter from the centre. So the centre is the dark colour, and as it goes out it's just getting paler or lighter, less intense. You don't need to worry about how well blended it is at this stage. You just want to make sure it's a good portion of colour. What else I am doing here is, you'll notice I have an acrylic block here, and that's what I do just to hold the paper down or the card down, just to make sure that I don't have fingerprints on it. Not so important at the minute when it's still white, but when we start getting to the other aspects, the other colours added in here, it's much easier to hold it down. And I just find that if I start with this, I remember to do it. There's nothing worse than getting halfway through this and realizing that you've put fingerprints in, because these inks are great, but they're very reactive to water and fingerprints and everything like that. So, okay. At the beginning, I start with 3 spots of each colour. So as I go through them, I'm just going to move them over to the side. Okay. Just so I know which colours I've done and what the next part is. So that was purple. I'm going to go in with the yellow now. I'm not going to make as big an impact with the yellow. It's just to give some variation of colour here. It will also, you know, if we mix it with either the peacock feathers or the salty ocean, it will allow us to get a green colour. I do have a green, but the green that I had is not, it's a very dark green, and what I am looking for here is a much brighter colour. So here we go. Just going to put the yellow one next, again choosing 3 spots at a time, just going around it, moving the brush around in circles. A harder, more concentrated colour in the centre, and getting paler or weaker as it goes out. Okay, and one last bit here. Although it looks like there's a pattern to this, there isn't. All I'm trying to do is remember that I'm going to be cutting this card up for card fronts. So I'm trying to make sure this, no matter what way I cut it up, I'm going to have most of the colours on each of the spots. Okay. Next we're going to come in, I'm going to come in with the picked raspberry. Again, I'm going to treat this similar to the squeezed lemonade and not make very big spots of this. All we're wanting to do is, it's very similar in colour to the seedless preserves, but again, what I'm looking for here is more of a, how does this blend in with some of the other colours here. So you'll see as I blend it in with the seedless, with the squeezed lemonades, we're getting a vaguely orangey colour there. But not putting big massive spots of this in. The majority of colour on this stage is going to be the salty ocean and the peacock feathers, and that's because to me blue and green are sky colours. It's worth remembering that if you are using an acrylic block to hold down, I'm just giving this a bit of a rub, to hold down your piece of card, make sure it hasn't got anything random on it like bits of glue or anything like that that you are accidentally leaving behind you. Okay, so now we're going to come in with the peacock feathers. And these shapes don't all have to be circles. I do that because I find that's what's easiest to blend out. You know, it's easy to start with a colour in the centre and then just blend round in a circle, and you automatically get that almost gradient effect. But if you'd prefer this to be lines or diagonals or whatever, that works just as well. It just depends on what exactly you want your galaxy to look like. But I just like putting nice circular splotches in there, and where possible I do want to bring it in to blend with the other colours. I just want to put a bit more down here actually, see if we can get it blending with those 2 colours there. So we have the yellow and the squeezed lemonade and the picked raspberry. Just see if we can get that peacock feather colour. And what you can't see in the background here, so I'm just going to move these back and give myself some more space with the salty ocean, is what you can't see off camera is when I'm blending, first of all I load the brush up, But when I come in first, my elbow of my blending arm is on the desk. So I just need to load a bit more ink up on that. My elbow is on the desk, and that just means that what you get is you are ensuring that the color is, the movement is coming from your wrist, and it just makes it easier to do it. You're not holding your arm up and having a lot of issues there. Not issues. Having a lot of movement through your arm. You know, this is a much more controlled way of doing this. Like I said, the majority of color here will be the blue. Okay. And that's just because, again, it gives you the nice background. You don't have to color the entire background in ink. What I do think works for me is making sure that the center is all covered. Because then when you come in with the black, you have spaces to cut it down. I also sometimes would, after I've cut it down, would come in with additional black, the black soot after I've cut it down, just to make sure that I have got black all around the edges, because you want to make sure it's, you know, the way you see when you're looking at something is you see darkness around the edge, especially when you're looking at something bright, you know, like stars or something like that. Away from the light is brighter. Now, because I'm doing this as an A4 page and I'm making this so it's going to be turned into eventually multiple galaxy colors, I'm not going to pay too much attention to that idea of the center of it. I could turn around, if I looked at this page here was going to be the bit that became the top of my card, I could make sure that it worked well, and you know, make sure there was good blending between everything at this stage. But I much prefer to work on this as if it's an entire background, and then when we come in to cut it down, we can go in, like I said, with the black soot and see that we're getting everything. See that it's all covered in the black soot where it needs to be. So I'm not doing all of this all around the edge here. You can see it's not as heavy a blue, so I'm keeping this fairly light, and that is more because I don't think, you know, we're going to be putting black over most of this, so it's more about giving it so that it's not going black on the black. And apologies, everything is moving. In fact, what I will do, oh no, that's not going to work, because I don't feel, be afraid to move your paper, you know, to make it easier to keep your elbow on the table and to blend. Don't be making yourself reach really far or have issues making everything work well for you. Move your piece of card around as needed. Now this is quite lightweight cardstock. I think it's 160 GSM, so this is not heavy stock. I don't mind that, because at the end of the day it's going on a card front, and I know it's going to go onto a mat and then it's going to go onto the card front, and it works. I think it blends well with my inks, but it's always worth trying this if you're doing this and for some reason it's not blending well. There's absolutely nothing wrong with trying a different cardstock, trying something just different to see how it works, because it can, the cardstock you use can make a difference to what the overall blend on the paper is, and what works for one person may not work for another, because it depends on your technique and your tools and your inks. So if you try this and it doesn't quite work as well as you think it should, especially if you're using distress oxides, because distress oxides blend really well and remarkably easily So if you're doing this and it doesn't blend well, I'll give you an example of this. I don't know how easy it is to see. This is a different piece of cardstock. I started on with this earlier before my daughter decided to wake up and cry the house down and had to stop. You can see here, you don't have the nice smooth blend that we have here. And that was just the wrong cardstock for the ink. So all I've done is put it to one side, it's now dry. The other side's plain. I can use that as a piece of card in another way. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying something like this and going, actually this cardstock doesn't work, this paper stock doesn't work. I need to move and try something else. And you don't have to try it on an A4 page. I tried that because that's what I wanted my end product to look like. But you know, try it on a scrap piece of card, or if you've cut the card down for something else, go in and try it there and see what you're getting. Like I said, don't worry too much about the blend here. Once we put the black on, we're not going to see an awful lot of this through. It's more some of the background that we get. The last part here. If you do find yourself, sometimes I find myself doing, I keep my elbow on the desk. Sometimes I'll lift it up without, especially if I'm stretching a bit further without realizing it. You can nearly always tell when you do, because you'll find your the top of your arm and your the top of your lower arm here will start feeling sore, and that's because you're putting pressure on it where you really shouldn't. The whole idea about doing these ink blending backgrounds is not that you should be in pain at the end of it. It's that you should be going through this and be like, well, that's fine. I don't feel any different from any other technique. So if you are finding pain, especially if you're using blending brushes or any form of the blending brushes, whether it's these type or the wooden handle ones, you know, try shifting the way you hold the brush, whether your elbow's on the table, whatever you need there to just give you that additional support and make it that bit easier. I'll colour up in this corner, and that's that done. So I've finished with the blue. I'm just going in one last bit there. But what I am going to, I know I said the overall blend is not important, and it's not. But what is important is making sure that you've put these colours on. Sorry, I've got a bit of something stuck there. We've put these colours on. We want them to still look good. So what I'm going to do now is just come in with each of these colours again and just do a bit of a lift on top like this. Not too much, but just enough to reinforce those colours that we had originally put on there. Okay, I'm basically working back. I'm going to leave the yellow, the squeezed lemonade, to the end because I always think that's the colour that, it's not palest, but it's the colour I think that always is least likely to look right, and for what better terms, I always leave the yellow to the end. I'm kind of working through paleness quotients, if that makes sense. The thing about distress oxides, if you've used them, if you haven't used them before, is that because they're almost like a chalky texture, they land on top of each other. So you put one colour on top of another, you'll still see both colours, or it blends really well. It's not like some of the colours where, when you'll see when I put the black on, it covers everything underneath it, which is what we wanted to do for this technique. But it's why I like using the distress ink in the black rather than the distress oxide. The distress oxide does blend much better, but I do much prefer using the ink for the black. And then last thing, moving this back up again so hopefully you can still see it. Okay, last thing, coming in with the squeezed lemonade, just for those last couple of places that we had the yellow in. Oh, that's pink. Go on to the yellow side of it, not the pink piece. And what I'm actually going to do is a couple of these much bigger red, purple parts. I can avoid messing the brush up too much. I was just trying to put a bit of a orange, yellow tint in there. I definitely don't want to mess my brushes up, so we'll leave that like that. So that's all the oxide inks done. So I am just going to tidy these away to give myself a bit more space. We won't need them anymore. I have a good cardboard tub at the side here, which has all of my blending brushes in it. Just put them away. I don't clean my brushes after I use them for this because it's one per colour family. I don't mind having the mixture from one to the other. I just find it works really well from a, I was going to say conserving point of view, but there's that much ink in these bristles. There's that much ink in the bristles that I don't want to ruin it. So what we're doing now is coming in with the black. This is where I think it's really important to keep the holding it using the acrylic block. And now I'm just coming in like this, going around from the edges and covering most of it in the black. It's really important, I feel, to make sure your edges are nicely coated, because these are the parts, like I was saying earlier, you want them to be darker. You always want the edges to be darker to give that impression of lighter in the center. One thing I always like when you use black ink is when you lift your page up off the protection map, you can definitely see where you're inking. Okay, now that I have this half done, I am going to come into the center and put black in over the center. But this is one of these ones where we don't mind if it kind of is not as heavy, not as concentrated. We don't want to take all the color underneath out here. Not necessarily saying that I want that part of purple to be completely purple. I am putting ink over it, but I'm making sure it's not so heavy that you can't see it underneath, because that's what we really want here. We want to be covering this up but letting it peek through, because that's what we're looking for in the galaxies. We're just looking for the colour underneath it to peek through and give us the idea of those swirling galaxies. When I'm putting the black on, I try to start it over one of the blue areas so that the most dense colour is over the blue. Still want some of the blue to peek through, but I think it's better than having it all again, we are not worried necessarily about how good of a blend this is, because whatever isn't blended well, it's just going to look like that variation. It's going to look like those galaxies. And you can see in this half, it doesn't look great because the blending isn't perfect. By the time we put the water splatters on, by the time we put the stars on and everything, I think this is going to look really good. Again, starting on the starting on the outside, and making sure I have a nice deep colour the whole way around here, in the corners and everything. Not sure where these other bits and pieces are coming from on my board, but here we go. All I do now is come in and put a layer, thin layer of the black over these colours. If you're trying to do the thinner ones, you can come and pick up some of the ink off the side of your blending mat, because we know that's not as heavy an ink as on the on the ink pad itself. And we know how crafters don't like to waste anything. I always hate it when you come to an end of a project and you have patches of ink and you look and I go, oh, I could use that to do some ink smooshing or make another background. Eventually somewhere you have to stop. There's only so many cards you can make, but I know this is, I'm sure other crafters like it too, where you want to get your money's worth out of your supplies. They're expensive enough to buy. Sorry, now you'll start seeing me tap off the ink at the side, and that's just because I don't want those big heavy blotches, black blotches coming in when I'm going over the colours. Sometimes I do like to get a bit of more of a black over the areas where we have multiple colours sitting together. Just think it makes it look a bit more like a galaxy. But now I'm just getting picky. The problem I have, and I think, well, I don't know about other people, the problem I have with ink blending is I'm never fully content. I always look at like, oh, I could do this and I could do that. Sometimes you just need to say, let's stop and see how things look now. What I'm going through now is turn my mat over. Okay. The next step would be to put the splatters and the stars and everything on, but I know I'm cutting this down to my card base. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave it for a couple of minutes to dry. It's not going to dry fully in the time. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to bring in my card base. So this is an A4 piece of card, and all I'm going to do is fold it over. I'm going to take my bone folder, fold it over, line up the two corners on the short side. You could also use a bone folder to make sure you're getting this exactly where you want it. And to avoid things like this happening where you end up with a piece where the card is just, oh no, I don't want to fold. Eventually it will fold. Just make sure you put that pressure on it. And this is going to give me an A5 size card. Okay, so there's the card base. Because this is A5, we'll come in and show you what A5 is. So A5 is 5 7/8 by 8 1/4, approximately. Okay, so what I want to do now is come in and cut this piece of cardstock down to give me a thin layer around it. I am going to use my caterpillar for this. And sometimes if you're not good with measurements, the way I think works well for this is to, so I've just noticed the back of this card is a blue colour. Where's my balance? Is that a metallic blue colour? I'm just trying to work out now which looks better, the metallic blue. We'll go for the silver. If you're never 100% sure, put it onto your, if you're never unsure what size to cut down your mats to, put your card base on your trimmer and then go, right, if I want, this is sitting at 5 7/8 of an inch, if I wanted to put a quarter inch border around this, I would need to put 1/2 inch on here. I'd need to take 1/2 inch off it, so I move this, and then if you move it 1/4 inch, that you can see what strip that's going to give you. And if we move it there, that is going to, so we want to cut this at 5 3/8, 5 3/8 lengthwise, and then do exactly the same thing this way, 8 1/4, and we'll take that down to 7 3/4. Okay, so length, we said this was 5 7/8, and we're taking 1/2 inch off that, so we're taking it down to here. And then just put marks on both edges here. And then this side we're taking it from 8 1/4 down to 7 3/4. So I'm actually just going to trim a 1/4 inch off either end, just to get rid of those bits that were a bit messed up on my card. And there, that should give you a good 1/4 inch gap all the way around. That's exactly what we want to see. Okay, so knowing that, we do exactly the same thing. So we say this is 5 3/8. If you're stuck taking 1/2 inch off things, just move it along 1/2 inch. So you go, there's 1/4 inch and there's 1/2 inch. We're going to cut this at 4 7/8 by 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 7 1/4. So I'm just going to come in with our page here. So the card base is 5 7. I'm just going to turn this over to the white side just so I don't put too many fingerprints on it. 5 7/8 is the card base. We took off 1/2 inch for the mat, and we want to take another 1/2 inch off for the layer here. So we're going to put that at 4 7/8. I'm just going to cut that. This is my spare piece that's going to go over here, and then this piece, this was 8 1/4, so we're going to cut it to 7 1/4. Put that down like that. And the reason I am doing this now, before I put the sparkles and everything on, you can now see what this is going to look like, okay, roughly, when I line that all up nicely. But also I can now come back in with my inks, my black ink, and make sure the edges are all nicely darkened, like I said. So let me just show you what I mean. So again, this side and this side were the edges that have already been done, so we don't need to worry about them too much. Coming in on the other side with the black and just making sure the edges have a nice cover to them, a nice blackness. And that way we'll see more from the inside. It also allows us to look at the smaller piece and say, is there any of this, like, is that green piece, that peacock colour there, is that a bit too bright? I don't want to get rid of it all, but I don't mind coming in and taking a bit of it down, because this stage should not be about, oops, I mean, we don't want to be seeing tons and tons of colour through this. Again, I'm being really careful with the amount of ink I am putting on for this part, so if you can see me, I'm literally only wiping the spur ink off the mat and using it to darken this down, so we're not putting fresh big globs of black ink on. And what that does now is gives us a really nice mat to start with. Now, we do want to let this dry before we put, I'm going to do some embossing on top of it. But before I do, what I also want to do is come in and do some splatters, some water splatters on here. So I'm going to have a tissue to one side, just so I know that I have it. I have a water bottle, spray bottle, and I just want to put it on, make sure, I think this goes, this one says spray or stream, so I'm just going to make sure I put it on spray. I'll do it from a distance. As always, no matter how much you want to do this, there's always one part that ends up being a bigger water spot than the other. But just coming around this and drying it off. Okay. What I am going to do, just on that one big splodge there, I'm going to come in with some black and cam that back a bit. I don't mind having the other bigger spots here, you know, these bits here are not so bad, but that one was just a tad too much for me. And then the other thing we can do is just spray a small bit of water on, oh, some of it hit the page again, so just making sure we're coming in to take that water off before it goes too far, but coming in and using the paintbrush to take some off. That's a way to do it if you don't like, you know, if you don't think your spray bottle on its own will give you enough control. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to leave that water there because I want to come in, just having a look to see if I have any around here. No, I was going to come in with some white, but I've just remembered I want to do the glow in the dark stars, so actually I'm not going to come in with some white at this stage. I am going to let that dry because the next step will be coming in with our sentiment and our embossing powders. So we'll need our 2 embossing powders, our sentiment, and some way of making stars. So I think I have some star stamps, or if you don't have a star stamp, you can if you do have an embossing pen. So there's a couple of different ones you can get here. Versamark have one that gives 2 different thicknesses, so you can see a fine tip and a thicker tip. Exactly the same here. This is a Zig emboss writer. It's exactly the same thing. We can just come in and put some stars, dots on with them. If you don't have them and you have something like this stamp, you can see there are some stars over this. You could come in and just put those stars into the embossing ink and stamp them where you want, if you wanted it to be more of a star shape. So I'm just going to leave this for a while to dry, and then I will come back and finish it. Okay, so I'm just leaving the Galaxy background there to dry, and what I'm going to do now is just come in and stamp the inside, the sentiment on the inside of the card. So I have a piece of fun foam here. I just like to have something to, when I'm stamping, to make sure that I get a really good coverage. So just going to get this stamp ready. I have the acrylic block I was using earlier. And that's the block I'm going to use to stamp this onto the card. Okay, and now what I like to do, because I'm going to be embossing this, I'm going to be embossing it in the detailed silver. This is my homemade embossing buddy. I just am coming in with it and putting a layer of cornstarch all over this. And the reason I do that is it means the embossing ink is only going to stick where we want it to. So coming in with the Versamark ink, I think if you are using a stamp positioner for this, this step is not as important, but if you are doing it like this just on a block, then I think it's important to make sure you get a good amount of ink on this. So you're only going to get one chance to stamp this time. Okay, making sure that you have the sentiment the right way up. And all you want to do is try and center it in the card and then press down. I just rub it over. You want to give it time for the ink to transfer from the stamp to the card, but we don't want to press down so hard that we're going to end up with the sentiment looking strange or unusual. I have a pair of tweezers which I'm going to use for when I come to heat the embossing powder. So I'm going to use that just to hold this so I can lift it up. And the great thing about using this on dark cardstock, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but I can definitely see that that has stamped really well on the card, so it's going to give us a good image. I have a piece of copier paper here. I'm just going to put it on underneath. I'm going to come in with the detailed silver and just sprinkle it over the sentiment. Okay, lift it up, just give it a tap, see if there's any stray pieces. I can see one annoying stray piece. But that's it. Use this paper to put the embossing powder back into the pot. It's worth remembering, embossing powder lasts for ages. You use so little of it on things like this. Now, I've seen people who've done big massive images with embossing powder, and that's going to use it up. And I know people who've done like using embossing powder to create a layer over an image, to give it like a dome effect. That can use more, but at this stage it's not going to use too much up. And that is the sentiment heat embossed. Give it a couple of seconds to cool down before you try and wipe any of the powder off, or at least over where it's been heat embossed. You want to make sure it's cooled down enough so you're not wiping it off, and then we can take the remainder of that powder off to give us a nice clean cut I'm just going to come back in with my bone folder now and just make sure that that is as clean a fold as we can get. And now on the inside of the card, that looks really nice. Okay, so that's that done. Put that to the side. What I need to do now is have a look at the panel. So I have let this dry for, I would say, about 45 minutes to an hour. And we're going to come in. The way I like to do this is, I like to put sentiment on first. And then, and this is just that very fine happy birthday stamp from Woodware. And then come in and do the stamp. So the way I'm doing this, I'm going to put the sentiment on in silver and put some stars in the background in silver. And then after I've heat set that, I'm going to come back in with the glow in the dark one. So here we go, like this. Just again, that's my homemade embossing buddy, just to make sure that we have, you know, it's only going to stick where we want it. And that's really important now when we're looking at this and we're going to be putting the stars and everything around it. I want to make sure we're getting the best we can. So this nice in the center. Coming in, pressing down, making sure I'm rubbing across firmly, but not so firmly that I feel like I'm breaking a finger or something like that, you know. I think, especially with the advent of stamping platforms, we feel like we have to put a massive amount of pressure on. The reality is we don't, as long as, you know, it's a good quality stamp. Using the tweezers again, just so we don't get any ink from my hand coming through. I don't know if you can see that now, but there is definitely, that word is coming through, that sentiment's coming through there. So let me just throw this stamp off to the side. Yeah, I've got a bit of time with embossing ink, and it's one of the joys of using it. It doesn't dry that quickly. So before I go in with the embossing powder here, I found this stamp set. This is one I used on a recent card. It's for the Love of Stamps Let's Celebrate stamp set. It's a small stamp set, but what I really like about it is it has two stars in here, a larger and a smaller one. I am just going to use them for this part. And even better, I have one of these. It's one of the circular ones, and you just, I like, just stick one on one end and one on the other. And these are not the only stamps I'm going to put on, but I do like that it allows me to kind of put some definite things that are stars on here. Just going to go in and put a range of stars. Don't want to be putting too many down. And that's enough of the bigger ones. And remember, we will be coming in with the glow in the dark ones as well. Okay, that's enough for the silver. Not going to move that off, but what I am going to do is come in with my really fine tipped embossing pen and just put a couple of dots around. Okay, and that's just to give us the stars, but also the ones that look further away. So yet again, coming in with my piece of copier paper, and everything on here is going into silver, detailed silver. Put the sentiment on first, and try to get over all of the stars and the dots. And exactly the same as we did on the previous panel, just lift it up. I just like to give it a tap or so. I was going to say, make sure that there's no obvious bits left on this, although this is not as important because obviously we've put dots and everything on the background here. So there's a couple that, as long as they're not in a line, I think you're going to get away with them. Okay, let's put this powder back into, let's put the powder back into the pot, and then it's ready for the next time we want to do this. And I'm just going to heat set it exactly the same way as we heat set the sentiment. This is a thinner card, so that's why we're seeing more of the warping. Just going to come in, wipe off the worst of the powder. I am going to come in with the powder again because this time we're going to do exactly the same thing with the stars and the pen, but we're going to be using the glow in the dark ink this time. So coming in again with the embossing body. Using exactly the same way as before, the stars and the Versamark. Coming in with the fine tip of my pen and doing exactly the same thing before, just putting a couple of dots. I'm going to put some dots in around the sentiment this time. I want to make sure we've got something all over the screen. Bringing in the copy paper, I put it the other side down just to make sure there's no contamination between the papers. And this again, glow in the dark. We're just going to sprinkle it all over the card front again. So I don't know if you can notice it here, but when the glow in the dark ones are heat set, they actually go invisible or less noticeable. Okay, so just coming in there and wiping that down, get rid of any of the paper on that. If there is there's a bit of warping to this, I'm not worried about it. I think my ATG tape will hold that down okay. If you get much worse warping, you can always leave it with a hard book or something like that on top of it to flatten it down before you move on to the next stage. Okay, so we're almost ready to finish the card. First thing I'm going to do, I've got my ATG out, so I'm going to put some tape on the back of the background we created. If you don't have an ATG, you can use double-sided tape, you can use glue, whatever you would use to stick your paper down. And then I just like to try and get it as even as possible. Much easier to do this when you're not on a camera. You can get your head right over it there and see how even this is. That's not bad. And then turning this over, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing on this side. When I use my ATG, I always do the same thing. 3 rows one way, 3 rows the other way. Coming into our card front, lining it up in exactly the same way. Just noticed a bit of ATG tape there was sticking over, and there we go. To finish this off, I have no idea where I got these, but I have these gems here that have a couple of star shapes on them, and I think I'm just going to put a couple of these on to give it that bit more added dimension. So just coming in with a bokeh tool and putting them down. I'm going to keep them close to the sentiment, I think. Put 3 of them on. You know me, you know I really like adding things like sequins and gems in odd numbers. And there we go.